Picture this scene. We're in a royal court. A powerful king is on his throne, his ministers and priests all around him, and standing before him are two very different groups. On one side, a handful of desperate refugees, hoping for asylum. On the other, a delegation of powerful diplomats, and they're demanding these refugees be sent back. What happens next is one of the most intense courtroom showdowns you can imagine, a moment that would test a brand new faith to its absolute breaking point.
So where are we? We're in Abyssinia, what we now call Ethiopia. The man on the throne is the Najashi, known far and wide as a just and fair Christian king. But you can just feel the tension in the air. I mean, the lives of more than 80 men, women, and children are hanging on his every word. This isn't just some legal case, it's a fight for survival, and really, a battle for the soul of a new spiritual message.
Okay, so who are the key players in this drama? Well, on one side, you've got the Muslim refugees. Their leader is a man named Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, who happens to be the cousin of the Prophet Muhammad himself. They run away from some really brutal persecution back home in Mecca. And on the other side, the pursuers. They've been sent by Mecca's elite, and their front man is the sharp, incredibly cunning diplomat, Amr ibn al-As. His mission? Simple. Drag the refugees back home, no matter what it takes. Now, the way this whole thing kicks off is fascinating. The Meccan delegation, led by Amr, walks in and immediately does the customary thing. They prostrate before the king. But then, the Muslims enter, and led by Ja'far, they walk in, stand tall, heads held high, not bowing an inch. The whole court is stunned into silence. One of the ministers sputters, "How dare you walk in without prostrating to the Najashi?"
And with that one powerful sentence, Ja'far lays it all on the line. I mean, can you imagine the courage that took? It immediately tells everyone in the room who they are and what they stand for. They will not compromise their core belief, not for anyone. But how did they get here? What could possibly have happened back home that made them risk everything to flee?
To really get it, you have to understand what was happening back in Mecca. For this small, new community of Muslims, life had become a living nightmare. The ruling tribe, the Quraysh, saw this new message of one God as a huge threat, a threat to their power, their traditions, and especially their economy, which was literally built on people coming to worship hundreds of idols. And things went south fast. For a couple of years, the message was shared privately. But the moment it went public, the opposition from the Quraysh just exploded. What started as ridicule and insults quickly spiraled into systematic, brutal violence. The streets of their own city became dangerous, forcing the prophet to tell his followers they had to find a safe haven somewhere else. And we're not just talking about name-calling here. People were being financially ruined by boycotts, and those without the protection of a powerful tribe, especially the slaves, were publicly tortured. The family of Yasar became the first martyrs, a husband and wife tortured to death simply for what they believed. Seeing all this suffering, the prophet, peace be upon him, gave them a piece of advice. He said, "Go to Abyssinia. There's a king there who will not stand for injustice. It's a land where you can worship in peace." For the Quraysh, having over 80 of their own people flee the city was a public relations disaster. It basically broadcasted their tyranny to the world. They couldn't let that stand. So, they put together their A-team, led by their top diplomat, Amr ibn al-As, armed with a very clever plan to get the refugees back. Amr's plan was seriously methodical. First, you grease the wheels. He shows up with chests full of expensive gifts for every single one of the king's ministers, basically bribing them to get on his side. The idea was to corner the king, to make it seem like everyone was in agreement. Then, he'd frame the Muslims as these young, foolish rebels who were going to cause nothing but trouble. And listen to how Amma words this. It's tactically brilliant. He puts the Muslims in this dangerous, undefined middle space. He's saying, look, they're not pagans like us, but they're not Christians like you either. There's something else. It was a classic move, designed to stir up religious and political suspicion. And his ministers, with their pockets full of gifts, were quick to agree, telling the king, yeah, just send them back. Their own people know how to handle them. But this is where the plan hits a brick wall, because the Najashi was a truly just man. He saw right through the political games. He refused, saying there was no way he would hand over people who had sought his protection without even hearing their side of the story. And that single act of justice set the stage for one of the most powerful defenses in history. So the Muslims are brought in. The Najashi looks directly at their spokesman, Ja'far, and he asks him straight up, "What is this new religion? You've abandoned the faith of your people. but you haven't taken up mine or any other." This was it. This was the moment. Everything was riding on what Ja'far said next. And Ja'far's opening is just genius. He doesn't start with complicated theology. He starts with sociology. He paints a vivid picture of the society they came from, using the term jahiliyyah, a state of deep ignorance. He's building a common ground, describing a broken society that any good ruler would recognize as needing help.
He lays out all the social problems that were poisoning their community. He says, "We worshipped idols, we ate dead meat, we abandoned our families, we were awful to our neighbors, and the strong among us just preyed on the weak." See, this wasn't some abstract religious debate. He was describing a total moral collapse.
And then he presents the solution, a messenger sent from God. But notice how he does it. Before he even gets into the message, he establishes the character of the messenger. He was from our own community, Ja'far says. We knew his family, his integrity, and his honesty. The man never told a single lie in his life. He was known as the trustworthy. This builds an immediate foundation of credibility.
And only then does he finally explain the message itself. And he frames it in universal moral language that he knows will connect with a righteous Christian king. He said the messenger commanded them to worship one God alone, to speak the truth, to honor our promises, to be good to our neighbors, and to stop all evil and bloodshed. Then Ja'far explained how their own people turned on them, tortured them for accepting this beautiful, simple message. He concluded his speech by saying, "And so, we emigrated to your land, choosing you above all other rulers, and we came hoping for your protection, trusting that we would not face injustice in your kingdom, your highness." The king was so moved. He asked to hear some of what was revealed to them, and Ja'far recited a passage from the Quran about Mary and the miraculous birth of Jesus. And as he spoke, the king and all his priests just started to weep, their beards becoming wet with tears.
Amr ibn al-As was completely humiliated. His perfect plan had just blown up in his face. But you know what? He wasn't done. He decided he had one more card to play. It was his most dangerous, desperate move, and it was designed to turn all that royal sympathy into pure outrage. The very next day, Amr is back in court, and this time he goes for the jugular. He accuses the Muslims of having a blasphemous view of Jesus Christ. Now, in a deeply Christian kingdom, this was like setting off a theological bomb. He was trying to reframe them from being rebels into being heretics. The king is, of course, disturbed by this. He calls the Muslims back in, and the mood in the room is even more tense than it was before. Their lives, which seemed safe just yesterday, are now hanging by a single theological thread. I mean, what do you even say? How do you answer this question truthfully without deeply offending a Christian king? And again, Ja'far just responds with this incredible, calm, courageous honesty. He doesn't get defensive. He doesn't attack anyone's beliefs. He simply and respectfully states what they believe, that Jesus is a servant of God, a messenger of God, and a word from God, and that he was born to the pure, noble Virgin Mary. And here is where the story takes its most incredible turn. See, what Amr didn't know was that the Najashi himself probably followed a form of Christianity that wasn't strictly Trinitarian. He likely believed that Jesus was a divine creation of God, but not God himself, which meant his own personal beliefs were actually incredibly close to what the Muslims had just described. So the king bends down and picks up a tiny twig from the floor. He holds it up for everyone to see, and he says that the difference between what Ja'far had just said about Jesus and what he believed Jesus himself actually taught was no bigger than that tiny little twig. It was a complete and total vindication. And with that, the verdict was in. The Najashi gave the Muslims his full protection and hospitality. Then he turned to Amr ibn al-As and his group, handed them back all of their expensive bribes, and had them thrown out of his court in disgrace. The refugees were finally safe. This story is so much more than just a piece of history. It's a profound lesson in courage. It shows how speaking your truth calmly and clearly can defeat even the most clever deception. It's a lesson in leadership about a king whose commitment to justice was bigger than any religious or political divides. And it really leaves us with a question for our own time. In a world that's still so full of prejudice and persecution, what can we all learn from the wisdom of Ja'far and the justice of the Najashi?